I agree with everything written in Scripture. So even though I'm going to say and provide a verse for various one model, today it's Calvinism, next week it's Arminianism, the following Molinism, and then Provisionism. These models I don't find myself fully agreeing with, but just know that it's not that I reject the biblical text. I don't reject what the Bible teaches. I disagree with an interpretation of what the Bible teaches. That's an important distinction, because there are going to be times when people think your disagreement with their interpretation is a disagreement with the biblical text itself. That is a non sequitur, and what the other person is doing is called begging the question, when you assume the conclusion that you already have. We do want to discover collectively, we want to do theology and biblical interpretation in a community together. So let's go on this journey together as we think about models of salvation. Let's start with Calvinism. Calvinism comes from John Calvin. He lived from 1509 to 1564, and his most well-known work is the Institutes of Christian Religion, which has happened to be a significantly influential book in Protestantism. His sort of headquarters, his head base was Geneva, Switzerland, and he was a preacher, a pastor, a theologian, but he was trained to be a lawyer. That's what his father wanted him to go into, but he found himself having a career in the Christian church. And so Calvin has really made a name for himself, especially if you've heard of the Presbyterian denominations, if you are familiar with the Dutch Reformed. These are big denominations influenced by John Calvin's thinking. Now, for those of you who have been doing theology for a long time, biblical studies, I'm going to explain some of the basics here for people that are really just maybe learning at the start. They are new to this. So some of the things you'll hear me say might be so obvious to you, but I hope you'll stick with me as we get into the biblical texts, because I'm going to read these passages in order to explain these models, and then later I'll respond. So what is the acronym? What's the easiest way to understand what Calvinism stands for? Well, that would be the TULIP, like the flower, and TULIP stands for total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and perseverance of the saints. Now, some Reformed theologians have some different titles or labels for these doctrines. Nevertheless, TULIP is a helpful tool for understanding what Calvinists believe. The earliest use of it has been hunted down to be the earliest use of the acronym TULIP. We can pinpoint to 1905 by a Presbyterian minister in New Jersey. He was the first one to use this TULIP acronym as a teaching tool. So let's do a quick rundown, a brief description of each one. I understand there are going to be Calvinists that are perhaps going to disagree with my brief rundown here. I am trying to do my best to accurately and precisely describe these points, because as I will show later on, sometimes these definitions are watered down to make it more appealing. We're going to get right into that with total depravity. All right, so first we've got total depravity, and this is the belief that humans are so depraved that we are unable to do anything objectively good. Now, this is my pinpointed definition, and we're going to go more in depth momentarily. Another word that has been used to describe this doctrine is inability. Men are unable, unregenerate men, so men who have not become Christians, so the natural state of man is that they are unregenerated according to the Calvinists. And so what is that natural state? Well, the natural state includes the extensive corruption of the fall. Now, I agree with that, the idea that the fall was so bad, it was so extensive, it's affected every area of human life. Calvinists are very quick to say, no, it's not about severe intensity, that we are doing the most evils possible, but rather that everything we do is evil. So it's a quick nuance to clarify against the intensity misconception. And that's fair, it is a misconception. But the doctrine of total depravity is actually more than just about the extensiveness, but the intensity of the corruption regarding the will of man. That men are unable to do anything objectively good. That's my pinpointed definition, and I'd be happy to see if that holds up, and I'll share a passage from Calvin that really supports what I'm communicating there. All right, moving on to the U. Unconditional election is the belief that God has, before he created the universe, pre-selected a specific, definite number of people that he will save. That's unconditional election. Limited atonement is the belief that Jesus' atoning work on the cross was purposed for a definite number of the elect. Irresistible grace is the belief that when God regenerates the will of man, that he cannot reject the gospel call. And sometimes Reformed theologians will call this the effectual call. Effectual. So it is effective. Finally, perseverance of the saints, which is not a uniquely Calvinist doctrine. Some Arminians hold to it. Baptists commonly hold to it. And we'll talk about that more. But perseverance of the saints is the belief that those whom God has chosen will persevere and never apostatize. So they'll never fall away. They'll never leave the faith. They stay tried and true. So that's the brief rundown on the TULIP, the Calvinist model of salvation.